Hi, Neil Lazarus here, and I wanted to bring you up to date with what's happening here in Israel. With only I think it's a week to go before Yom Ha'atzmaut, Israel's 60th celebration for independence. Welcome back to the blog, and the question I'm going to ask you, and I want to hear your views, is one question: was Jimmy Carter right to talk to Hamas and Khalid Mashal, the political chief of Hamas in Syria? I want to know your thoughts. Drop me a line and let me know. As most of you who've been watching the politics in the Middle East know, things here have been a little bit crazy. We've had, in the last 10 days, witnessed a flurry of diplomatic contacts between Israel, Egypt. Is there going to be a ceasefire? Won't there be a ceasefire? And it's within that context we saw the visit of Jimmy Carter to Syria and visiting Khalid Mashal. Again, remember there's an argument. Hold on, before we even start that, I want to put a few things into order in case you're a little bit confused. Let's sort out the difference between Fatah, the Palestinian Authority, the PLO, and Hamas, because everyone gets that confused. I think we even talked about it in another broadcast. Very quickly to remind you, PLO is the Palestine Liberation Organization, umbrella organization founded in the mid-60s against Israel. It was founded actually before 1967 and Israel's control of the West Bank and Gaza Strip, etc. It was made up of a number of groups. That largest group was Fatah, a secular, somewhat pragmatic, everything's relative, group which was run at the time by Yasser Arafat after a year or so. At the same time, we see not only the PLO, not only Fatah, Palestinian Authority. Palestinian Authority was created in 1993 as a part of the Oslo Accords with Yitzhak Rabin, Yasser Arafat, and Bill Clinton. The idea was to hand over power to the Palestinian Authority to enable what would be, it wasn't written in Oslo, but what was intended to be a two-state solution. Hamas has always been on the outside. Hamas is in fact the Palestinian or Palestine branch of the Islamic Brotherhood, which is, by the way, why the Egyptians are so worried about what's going on with Hamas. They're looking at home. Remember, Mubarak is ill. Mubarak is old. Mubarak's on in the twilight years of his government. What will happen with the Islamic Brotherhood in Egypt? That is Egypt's connection with Hamas. Back to what we were talking about. Hamas is the group which is a Sunni fundamentalist group. And when I say fundamentalist, I mean it by the real terms. You know, I just was watching Al Jazeera a few weeks back, and there was a debate between Hamas and Fatah where Hamas was talking about how to fight the Israelis according to the Quran. Let's take a literal translation. Hamas has always been on the outside, and at the same time they have seen anything to do with the Oslo Accords as a way America was trying to spread its imperialism. Last elections they won, and then there was a military coup in Gaza where they took control. Since that military coup, the world has isolated them, trying to bolster Fatah, who are perceived as the more moderate groups. I think that the Carter visit is interesting and significant because it, in many ways, signifies a change perhaps in the atmosphere. Look, everyone here can sense that the George Bush period is over, where we're not going to talk, we're going to isolate Iran, which by the way has been Israeli foreign policy for the last near decade as well. Things are changing in America, and I think the Carter perhaps preempted changes which we may well see the new presidential candidates, especially if they are Barack Obama, especially if they are Hillary Clinton, taking, although Barack Obama did condemn the visit by Carter. What I want you to understand is the context this visit came in. In other words, changes had already started taking place. By the way, remember, Jimmy Carter's interesting in himself. First of all, he was the man that brought the Egyptians and the Israelis together with some very important diplomacy. So, you know, I reject the claims by people such as Dershkovitz, etc., that Carter is a bigot. He's not. is someone with politics, a clear political line, and certainly let's reject this idea that he's an anti-Semite, far from it. On the other hand, he's hardly the greatest fan of the state of Israel's control of the West Bank. I remind you, he wrote, Jimmy Carter's book, he wrote Palestine, Peace, Not Apartheid, and he described Israel's control of the West Bank. Let me read you, he says, Israel's continued control and colonization of Palestinian land have been the primary obstacles to a comprehensive peace agreement in the Holy Land. In order to perpetuate the occupation, Israel forces have deprived their unwilling subjects of basic human rights. That's Carter. Now, he may be accurate, he may not be accurate. I want to hear what you're going to say. But the reality is, very, very harsh critic of Israel, especially Israel's policies in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, or Judea and Samaria. At the same time, remember, Carter's totally opposed to the war in Iraq. So he's putting himself on the other side of the political argument, which I think is developing within the American foreign policy. One of the things which I think is interesting to note is that there's no communication lines between Hamas and Israel. Look, there are unofficial contacts. Don't tell anyone. Don't post it on YouTube. But there are contacts unofficially via third countries to talk with Hamas, especially over releasing Gilad Shalit. But the reality is that there's no hot phone, there's no red phone, there's nothing that, in the same way in the Cold War when America was talking to the Soviet Union, there was a red phone of emergency. There's no communications like that. And to that extent, I think it's important because it marks a first, perhaps important communication with Hamas itself. The question is this: is Israel willing to move towards the so-called, and I stress the word so-called, ceasefire of that Hamas is offering in the Gaza Strip? You know, at first thoughts you would think, what's the problem with the ceasefire? Well, there are a number of problems, and we are going to explore them right now. First of all, I think there's an important thing to stress, which is not Carter's visit, but Eli Yishai, who's the head of Shas, turned round and said, I want to meet Khalid Mashal to talk about Gilad Shalit's release. Khalid Mashal refused, which gives me a little bit of doubt about how sincere Khalid Mashal of Hamas really is. I mean, I remind you, and a lot of the Western press got it wrong, Khalid Mashal didn't say he was going to recognize Israel. He said he would recognize the 67 borders. Hold on, but if you're recognizing 67 borders without recognizing Israel, what does that mean? I let you to write your own interpretations afterwards. Second of all, Hamas's capacity to deal positively with Israel is weakened because there is a political split. Hamas itself isn't an entity. There's a split within Hamas about what should happen. Should there be a total rejectionism? Should there be a hudna? Should it be a sincere hudna? Hamas, by the way, is weakened. They was first of all saying linking the West Bank with Gaza. They're now saying ceasefire in Gaza as an only condition. So there has been a move on their parts. What's also interesting is I think most people here in the Middle East know that time's not on their side. You know, we keep talking about Yom HaTzmaut. Yom HaTzmaut, Independence Day, is important because Israel wants quiet. They wanted quiet for Pesach. They want quiet for Independence Day, which is going to see Bush here, is going to see a lot of Americans and important international diplomats here. The question is what happens at the end of May. Because at the end of the May, either there will be a ceasefire or I would expect some heightened intervention by Israel in the Gaza Strip. There's an irony in Israeli policy, by the way, which is on the one hand, talking to Hamas weakens Abu Mazen. But Abu Mazen just came back from America and said, I succeeded in doing nothing for the peace process. Is Israeli policy weakening the moderates anyway, and only the extremists of Hamas are actually winning? By talking to Hamas, they're being strengthened. By not talking to Hamas, they're also being strengthened because they're seen as the true opposition to the state of Israel. What is clear is that the clock is ticking as far as Israel-Hamas relations are concerned. Time is not on our side. But Carter's meeting brought attention to the fact that the official American strategy today in the Middle East is failing, and everyone in the Middle East is seeing that there's going to be winds of change as George Bush leaves. Was Carter right? Was he too controversial? Or was he just reflecting what everyone knows is that at the end of the day, Hamas is a serious political player.